Okay, well, we've got colleagues live streaming from Europe and elsewhere, so I will greet you with good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as the case may be. I'm Alondra Nelson. I'm the Harold F. Linder Chair in the School of Social Science here at the Institute for Advanced Study, where I lead the Science, Technology, and Social Values Lab. I'm happy to welcome you to today's 2024 IAS Public Policy Lecture. This is an annual lecture organized by the School of Social Science that addresses topics of contemporary politics, economics, science, and society. And we've welcomed in the past Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, former UN ambassador Lakhdar Brahimi, and scholars Thomas Piketty and Keeanga Yamada-Taylor, among other very distinguished speakers. And it is through the generosity of an anonymous donor that we're able to have these lectures, and so we thank that donor as well. Today's speaker is Margrethe Vestager, Executive Vice President of the European Commission for a Europe Fit for the Digital Age, who oversees the EU's digital strategy, in addition to serving as the European Commissioner for Competition. As the European Union's antitrust chief, Executive Vice President Vestager has instituted sweeping technology regulations and assured compliance with existing ones. The Institute here has long been a place for the development of foundational insights that have often led to the creation of new technological developments. It has a unique role in the history of computing. So those of you who are here joining us for the first time, just across the lawn there is Fuld Hall, the very first building of the Institute for Advanced Study campus. And there in the basement of Fuld Hall, one of the first stored program computers was created under the leadership of former faculty member John von Neumann. The Institute has also been a place where scholars have thought deeply from the perspective of the social sciences about the implications of technology, such as the work of our platform working group seminar, scholars who've been in residence here for the academic year thinking about these issues. The Institute is therefore, I think, a very fitting place for EVP Vestager's talk today and her reflections on what J. Robert Oppenheimer tells us about technology. Oppenheimer saw the Institute, where he served as director for 2 decades, as a place where scholars from across fields and disciplines could dialogue, collaborate, and even disagree on themes involving technology, innovation, and society. In the decades since his death, however, these issues have only become more urgent and more pressing. We've seen many advances in technology and many changes in society. Executive Vice President Vestager joins us here at the Institute at a time when artificial intelligence in particular is top of mind, especially for lawmakers and legislators. It's a kind of moment at a kind of precipice, and one that requires special attention from all of us, whether or not we're scholars or members of the public or people working in government. Today, to help us begin to sort of think about some of these issues in the context of the rich history of the Institute and of the future we all hope to build, we have one of the best with us today, who's on the front lines of this new world of technology and technology governance, and helping us think about innovative ways for how we should govern new technologies. After the talk, I'll moderate a Q&A with Executive Vice President Vestager, and we'll have questions from the audience, and then we'd welcome you to join us for a reception at Rubenstein Commons following that. With that, please join me now in welcoming European Commission Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager to the stage for the 2024 IAS Public Policy Lecture.
Good morning. It's a true pleasure. It's a true honor to be here today. This morning, walking the steps of some of the world's most illustrious thinkers, along the Fuld Hall, all the way to this room where many have given lectures that has literally changed the course of time. You, of course, know them by heart. Albert Einstein, John von Neumann, Hetty Goldman, and of course, Julius Robert Oppenheimer. The very Oppenheimer that directed this institute and sets history on a new course with his contribution to nuclear science. And these days, probably the most famous theoretical physicist. Oppenheimer, I think, owes to a large part of his revived fame throughout the world to Christopher Nolan's amazing talent as a movie director. 7 Oscars seem to be enough. Who's counting? But I guess maybe the truth is the other way around. Nolan's movie owes to a very large part of its success to Oppenheimer himself, to his complex, sometimes puzzling personality. Without him, there would not be the material to make an Oscar-winning movie. Oppenheimer, of course, was a scientist, but he was also a humanist. One of the first science men to have asserted that technology and humanity can only go together. And now it seems trivial, but it was a very modern thought in not so modern times. Before many others, Oppenheimer understood that some technologies do not simply add something to the world. They change it completely. And this is what my countryman Niels Bohr meant when, in the movie, he tells Oppenheimer, "This is not a new weapon, this is a new world." The nuclear weapon did not just add up to traditional warfare. It completely changed the stakes of traditional war. It triggered the need for international cooperation because the cost of not doing so was simply too big for anybody or anyone to contemplate. Now, fast forward 80 years, here we are today. Digital technologies, they do not only add new ways for us to learn, to buy, to create, to keep in touch, to work. Digital technologies, they change the world as we know it. And I see 3 ways that this is happening in particular. First, with the dominance of digital platforms, technology changes democracy. Second, with the rise of general-purpose artificial intelligence, technology is challenging humanity. And third, with the global race for the technologies we need the most, technology is changing our economic security. And because of that, shaping a new geopolitical order. Europe is on its way to answering all 3 of these challenges. Over the last decade, we have shaped our model of digitization, a model based on a very simple idea. Technology must serve humans. No matter how fast technology evolves, we must make sure that it serves humans, because the risk is real that it's the other way around. Today, this model positions Europe in the forefront of the global effort to govern tech. But we need a much broader range of democratic partners to do this. This is not for Europe alone. It takes the world to govern technology. And this is what I'd like to talk with you about today. But before I do, just one thing. In Europe, we regulate technology because we want people and businesses to embrace it. We need to bring down the old cliché that regulation goes against innovation. Quite the opposite, actually. Laws exist to mitigate risks and to open up markets that were otherwise closed. So we can go full on using technology, so businesses can freely innovate, and so that we can mobilize public and private investment needed to be at the edge, but only if we can trust technology. Now, this said, let me take you through my 3 lessons for today's technology, starting with online platforms. It's not a new weapon, it's a new world. A world where the fundaments of our democracies are challenged by the rise of digital platforms. Democracy thrives in open spaces, in agoras, universities, institutes, public houses, parliaments. in places where people can discuss, disagree, contradict each other, find compromise, do it all over again, repeat. And this do not look so different from the infancy of the internet back in the 1990s. The World Wide Web came with a promise to be a free place, open to all, a source that would facilitate access to knowledge, increase trust, challenge the grip of authoritarian states on information. 30 years later, that promise was never fulfilled. The picture looks radically different. A few players started organizing the internet for what would soon become billions of users worldwide. They became the global matchmakers between providers and consumers of all kinds, basically. Step by step, they took space in our life. And with that space came power, and with power came control. In just a few years, we saw conversations closing down into constellations of private chat, our messaging groups, our social media feeds. We saw content pushed to millions by sophisticated algorithms, not because it's true or because it's relevant, but because it is emotionally viral. Think of all the risks that this entails for our democracy. The risk to see our public debate privatized into scattered, polarized places, with no contradiction, with no fact-checking. And the risk that we end up thinking that the world is as large as we see it online, or rather, as small. The risk not just that we can no longer share the facts, but that we lose trust in everything and in everyone who is not one of us. That's the fundamental risk. So we thought that we couldn't let a few large platforms threaten democracy at large. So we have taken action. We wanted to give back people parts of the control that they had lost to platform, one initiative at a time. Starting with the General Data Protection Regulation that entered into force in 2018, it enacted the right to privacy. We took this work further a few years later with our Declaration of Digital Rights and Principles, which was proclaimed in 2022. We set out to make sure that just as we have had rights for decades and decades and decades in the physical world, well, we should have the equivalent rights in the digital world. The right to be treated equally, to be treated fairly, the right to have access to reliable information, to freely express ourselves, and to have safe online journeys. Obviously, stating rights, giving rights to people is not enough. We must also enable people to exercise those rights. That is where they gain value, when you can make them come to life in your everyday life. And that's the purpose of the Digital Services Act, Europe's first sort of flagship law regulating online content. Because we cannot accept that we are faced with illegal posts when scrolling on social media. We cannot accept that platforms become a place where abusers meet children. We cannot abuse that harmful videos damage young women's mental health. And we cannot accept that platforms' algorithms are being used by foreign adversaries to jeopardize our democracy through disinformation campaigns. Never. And of course, especially not in election years. So we have made platforms legally responsible for the content that they help spread. Under the Digital Services Act, they must take down illegal content. They must moderate harmful content while preserving users' freedom of speech. They must share how their recommender systems select the content that we see. They must declare political advertising, and they must protect minors from harm. There's more, but these are some of the important points. But don't get me wrong here. The point is not that there is sort of a pseudo-European state that wants to censor everybody everywhere. That is really not the point. Actually, quite the opposite. We are enabling users to have the benefit of the laws that are enacted in the democracies that they live in. It is in our member states, with all the legitimacy that comes with democracy in member states, that decisions are taken about what is illegal and what is not. This system enables all these laws to become real. That's something that people can enjoy when online, so that people can safely express themselves with the respect for others, because there's legitimacy in the democracy. Friends, as said, democracy thrives in open spaces. This means places where you're free to discuss, free to choose. And this leads me to another point, this time an economic element of our society. Because the thing is, if you have vivid, open, fair marketplaces, where every choice we make as a consumer, we are being recognized with the power you have as a consumer. You have a say. It is your choice. And I think being respected as a consumer also rubs off on democracy, that you feel that you have agency. Years of antitrust enforcement, including not one, not two, but 3 Google cases, and actually another one ongoing, a Facebook case, a couple of Amazon cases, an Apple case, and more. This has taught us that the same causes create the same effects. Whether offline or online, fear, greed lead big and powerful companies to want more power. With time, large digital platforms, they have outgrown their role as simple matchmakers connecting supply and demand. They've started providing their own services on the platforms that they control. So they're both playing the game and being the referee of that game. Practices like self-preferencing started to lock users inside specific ecosystems. If you do a Google search for a plane ticket from Brussels to New York, well, the first thing that you see are the options provided from Google Flights. Do you look for where to buy a new kitchen robot? Immediately, you will be served a list of preferred shops put together by Google Shopping. Progressively, a handful of players, well, they closed the gates of the digital marketplace and made it the realm of the few big ones. And this has taken the chances away for smaller players to make it for real, to compete against the big ones. And it also deprives us as users, as consumers, to choose among options. It drives prices up, choice and innovation down. So the digital markets came in to solve this with its list of do's and don'ts. It forces dominant players to open the gates of the market. For instance, all 6 platforms designated under the DMA must adjust their search algorithms so that rival offers receive the same prominence as their own. The DMA came into force on the 7th of March. A few days later, we launched investigations into suspected non-compliance with 3 of the designated gatekeepers, Alphabet, Apple, and Meta. We've also launched investigations under the Digital Services Act, the DSA. A few weeks ago, the European Commission opened a procedure to assess whether TikTok is failing to protect minors. If proven in all these investigations, which are of course not pre-concluded, if they are proven that they fail to meet their obligations, well, sanctions will hit. there is all the encouragement in this legislation to be compliant. Rules are in place. Now it's the time to apply them, because with legislation you change perception, but with implementation and with enforcement you change behavior. And obviously, it is behavior that changes the world. The good thing is that Europe is not alone in this endeavor. All around the world, democracies have woken up to the urgent need for the many to regain control from the few. Also in this country, in this nation, I feel that perception has changed dramatically. 3 years ago, before we started the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, I had to constantly contend, in my view, unfounded criticism that this was all about targeting American big tech firms. Last week at the Trade and Technology Council, we adopted a statement that shows how deeply aligned Europe and the US have become on recognizing the harm that platforms may do, and of course their responsibility to address them. I'm aware of the challenges of passing legislation in this country, but why would one accept that these platforms have to protect minors in Europe, but not here? Why should one accept that European researchers can access data from these platforms, but not other researchers? And while all of this is in motion, just one thing I think for me it's important to be open about. I think that we probably came to this problem too late. Today we are doubling efforts to catch up with the lost time, trying to reverse harm that has become entrenched. So there is one space where we don't want to make the same mistake again, and that is, of course, artificial intelligence. This time we acted early on. And that leads me to my second lesson inspired by Oppenheimer today. This isn't a new weapon, it's a new world. Nothing could resonate better with artificial intelligence, and for very good reason. Probably never in history have we been confronted with a technology with so much power, but with no predefined purpose. Neither good nor bad in itself, depends on how we as humans shape it, how we use it. Just like in Oppenheimer's time, we are faced with what AI researchers called an alignment problem. When technology has a purpose or the power both to serve and to destroy us, how do we channel its development? How do we ensure that technology reflects the societies that we want to have, instead of amplifying the flaws, the injustices of the ones that we have already? Dear friends, it took ChatGPT just 60 days to reach 100 million users. Instagram needed more than 2 years to reach that number. The rise of general-purpose AI brought new benefits that we could simply not imagine, but it also brought a new consciousness of the possible risks. Since then, much debate has arisen on whether the technology can bring existential risk to humanity. And that debate is certainly worth having. But it shouldn't distract us from the fact that the risk that we experience today can also be existential. They are existential to humans, to individuals. Whether you can or cannot get a mortgage, can access university, get a medical treatment that is adequate to you, these are existential decisions. This will decide how your life turns. And if AI is to play a part in those decisions, then we need to make sure that it recognizes us as who we are, as individuals, without the biases and the prejudice that we have accumulated as humans. In authoritarian parts of the world, we have seen AI developed and used for mass surveillance, for social credit systems, to oppress minorities, to censor and to control information. We face the advent of AI-powered predictive policing. Humans targeted for not what they have done, but for what algorithms consider them likely to do. Getting in control of these existential risks is a priority for us as humans. And the only way to make sure that these technologies delivers for us this enormous promise, this is what we need to do if we are to live up to the legacy of Dr. Oppenheimer. I believe that it requires three things. First, that we put our own house in order. And this is what led us in Brussels back in 2021 to draw the outline of what has become the first ever worldwide law on artificial intelligence. It was passed by the European Parliament 1 month ago. Here in the United States, thanks to your leadership, Dr. Nelson, the White House adopted its blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights in 2022. Last October, the President signed his executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. This is only the beginning of our journey. As we have just discussed, rights are only as valuable as our capacity to enforce them, to bring them to life. So we must move quickly in developing the standards, the methodologies, the benchmarks that allows us to make sure that AI is shaped and used safely. Second, we need a shared democratic model of AI development. AI is bigger than any one of us. And as we move forward, we need to foster an international convergence for guardrails on AI. This is natural to start with those for whom we share the closest values. And this is what we achieved last October, thanks to the Japanese leadership on the Hiroshima process. I think a befitting name to remind us about the man behind this lecture. The G7 Code of Conduct on AI is the most advanced product of international collaboration so far. It needs to be swiftly put into motion through a common monitoring and evaluation system. Still, that is not enough. And this is my third point. We need to invest in universal governance of AI. The only real guarantee of safe AI will take everyone or no one. At the end of the day, we will need to find for the whole world to come on board, including those we fundamentally disagree with. Just like in the midst of the Cold War, the world would come together to set limits to nuclear proliferation. It's not unthinkable that this can happen now. On the 21st of March, the United Nations General Assembly adopted its first resolution on AI. And later this year, the UN Secretary General's high-level advisory body on AI will release its recommendations. And that will be a starting point for further discussion, to lead to agreement, to lead to action. We know that this will not be an easy task, because these are times of systemic rivalry. The world is thrown into a fierce global tech race, a complex web where commercial interests intertwine with ideological beliefs and security concerns. And that leads me to the third and last Oppenheimer lesson. This isn't a weapon, it's a new world. It isn't just about technologies. It's about how the race for the technologies we need the most is changing the global economy. Take a step back. Beyond the digital transition, we're undergoing a technological revolution. And the stakes are just as essential this time for our planet. Clean tech will drive our shift away from fossil fuels. It will enable us to fight climate change, which is a must-do. And one thing is clear, in a world powered by technology, those who lead are those who control the most critical technologies, and of course, their supply chains. Chips, batteries, electrical cars, our competitiveness will necessarily depend on our capacity to produce them and to deploy them. Both the COVID pandemic and Russia's brutal war on Ukraine have shown us our vulnerabilities. Europe and the US, each in our own way, depend on third countries for critical technologies. And the raw materials obviously need to produce them. And in this area, China has built up a very strong position, not always playing fair. China is, for us, simultaneously a partner in fighting climate change, an economic competitor, a systemic rival. And the last two dimensions are increasingly converging. We saw the playbook for how China came to dominate the solar panel industry. First, attracting foreign investments into its large domestic market, very often requiring joint ventures. Second, acquiring the technology and not always above the board. Third, granting massive subsidies for domestic suppliers while simultaneously and progressively closing the domestic market for foreign businesses. And fourth, exporting excess capacity to the rest of the world at low prices. The result is that nowadays, less than 3% of the solar panels installed in Europe are produced in Europe. We see this playbook now deployed across all clean tech areas, legacy semiconductors and beyond, as China doubles down on the supply side support strategy to address its own economic downturn. Our economies cannot absorb this. It's not only dangerous for our competitiveness, it also jeopardizes our economic security. We have seen how one-sided dependencies can be used against us. And this is why Europe, and not only the US, is reacting. In October last year, the European Commission launched an anti-subsidy investigation into the import of electrical vehicles from China. If we determine that those electrical cars have been illegally subsidized, we will impose remedies. In the last weeks, we have also launched investigations under our foreign subsidies regulation. Every time we suspect that any foreign company has been unduly advantaged in a public tender, we will dig further. We have investigated suspicious bids in public tenders for trains in Bulgaria, resulting in a Chinese state-owned company withdrawing its bids from this tender. Just last week, we opened investigations into bids by Chinese companies that may unduly have been advantaged in public tenders for solar panels in Romania. Furthermore, I can announce today that we are launching a new inquiry into Chinese suppliers of wind turbines. We're investigating the conditions for the development of wind parks in Spain, in Greece, in France, in Romania, and in Bulgaria. As you can hear, we're making full use of the tools that we have. But I can't help that we're also a bit sort of playing whack-a-mole. We need more than a case-by-case approach. We need a systemic approach. And we need to do this before it's too late. We can't afford to see what happened to solar panels happening again on electrical vehicle, on wind, on essential chips. Let me be clear about this. The investment that we put in our supply chain, the investigations that we run, or the tools that we have developed, they were not meant to constrain China's success. They are meant to restore fairness in our economic relations. Everyone is welcome to be successful. everyone is welcome to trade with Europe, but they have to play by the rules. Rules of fairness, rules of reciprocity. As we further develop the strategy for clean technologies, we reflect about the question of trustworthiness. These products, they are now connected. And more, they are an essential part of our critical energy and transport infrastructure. So we must make sure that we can trust them, so that we know that they will uphold our values, that they will protect us, that they will protect our privacy, that our car will not involuntarily spy upon us. I believe that like-minded partners, starting with the G7 country, should develop a list of trustworthiness criteria for clean tech technologies. These can include environmental footprints, labor rights, cybersecurity, data security, criteria that are objective and country agnostic. And these criteria can be deployed in different ways, as conditions for certain incentives, when granting certification before a product is used in certain sensitive areas, or as a non-price criteria in public procurement auctions, just to give you a few examples. And those criteria would be developed with like-minded partners, but they would apply to all trustworthy producers across the world, because in that way we can reach critical mass and align our competitiveness with the values that we share. And this is what the Inflation Reduction Act missed, in my opinion. By tying the criteria to local production instead of trustworthiness, the US limited the potential scale for Western producers. And it forced us to react by enabling matching subsidies, which meant that essentially each of us are using taxpayers' money to attract certain projects from each other, instead of giving our companies an innovative or competitive edge in this global race. As both the US and the EU enter electoral periods, we see uncertainty ahead, or increasing uncertainty because the times are already not too good. But one thing remains certain. In this geopolitical race for technology, having partners that you trust is a competitive advantage. Friends, as Oppenheimer coordinated the creation of the Los Alamos facility, he brought together some of the world's best physicists. But not only, he brought all kinds of scientists together. And he further expanded the model here at the Institute for Advanced Study, where he hosted artists and historians so they could learn from each other. First, because crossing disciplines increases the chances of success. The excellence and the success of this place proves it 1,000,000 times. But even more so, because Oppenheimer knew that we cannot dissociate technology from the world that we're born in. The scientific discovery from the impact that it has on humanity. How technology is made from how it should be used. And this is maybe where our role as policymakers kick in. Scientists developed nuclear energy, but politics decided on its use, a weapon or a source of energy. After the war in around 1950, politics created the International Atomic Energy Agency to promote the safe, the secure, the peaceful use of nuclear technologies, which then created the conditions for the Non-Proliferation Treaty. When it comes to digital, this is our 1955. And the policy choices we make today will shape how technology is developed, how it's used for decades to come. It will decide if the UN Charter is still relevant by the end of this century. This isn't a weapon, it's a new world. Indeed, just like nuclear decades ago, technology has the power to unfold a completely different world. But it's up to this world to decide what to make of technology. A weapon to diminish our humanity and turn us against one another. Or, as I tend to see it, considering myself a realist, a formidable source of human progress. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for those reflections, both on some of the most significant accomplishments of your trajectory and some of the new work that you're doing with the announcement that you made today about the investigations into not only US-based platform companies, but also Chinese companies as well. So I wanted to ask you about how we get information, and we can maybe link it back to your invocation of the Digital Services Act. It has been a challenge for researchers and for legislators to get access to the information you need from companies to do some of the legislative work, the accountability work, the governance work. I mentioned that we've got the platform seminar working group of scholars meeting here, and we have, over the course of many of our careers, sort of come up against not being able to get access to the data you need to even understand how these platforms sort of operate in society. So one of the, I think, highlights for researchers and for a research community here at IAS is Article 40 of the Digital Services Act, which for the first time legislates access for researchers to social media platform data. I wanted to, in a prior life, I was president of the Social Science Research Council, and we administered a project for 2 years that was supposed to make Facebook data available to researchers, and had mixed results. We're still trying to get access to some of that data many years later, which is just to say that it's a hard thing to do. And I wanted your thinking on, a year or so in, how you think the Digital Services Act is working for researchers and for researcher access, and how it might be used for what you announced here today to think about inquiries into companies, in China and elsewhere.
Well, we were. I was talking with some of the team when we launched these new investigations due to the DMA, and they know that if they have a break this year, it's Easter, because they will be very busy for the rest of the year. And one said, well, it's like when you're pregnant. That can be hard enough. And then you give birth, and then you realize, oh my God, it changed my life. And it's a bit the same with this kind of legislation. It was difficult to draft it, to discuss it, to pass it in Parliament. Now to implement it, enforcing it, that would be a huge challenge. Because we are so close now to the business model and the culture of the designated platforms that this doesn't come easy. So everybody is needed here. And it's for good reasons that we have the provisions for researchers to have access. Because we need researchers to look at what is happening with all different perspectives and ways to look into what do platforms actually mean. For instance, with the ads library, so that you can see what kind of ads are actually out there, because we do not get the same advertising. What I see may not be the same as you see, will not be the same as any of you see. So having, a horizontal overview as what is actually being pushed towards us. Marking political advertising, again, so that it can be analyzed, that we can see through it, that we have a transparency, what is actually being pushed upon us. So we're very happy with the agreement that we have in the statement of the 6th Trade and Technology Council to use the DSA to give access to researchers also outside of Europe. And we will do our best to make this happen. We think that we can make great progress this year to enable it. It may not be perfect the first time, but I think we can go much further than we have done so far. And I think to complement what we can do as enforcers, what market participants can do when they come to us with their observations, what researchers and NGOs can do in order to understand what is ongoing. That is what it takes, because it takes a full community to make this change happen. Otherwise, the laws will not be complied in full.
Thank you for that. So we had news over the weekend in the policy space in the US, which was a draft privacy bill. We've been trying to have federal policy around data privacy in the United States for many, 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 many years. We got close about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and couldn't quite, get there. So this American Privacy Rights Bill, draft legislation, bipartisan, that was released a couple of days ago, is an attempt to do something the EU did 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago now, with the General Data Protection Act. So, implementation is hard, but almost 6 years is long enough to have learned lessons. So what advice or what lessons would you sort of offer from a EU perspective on having accomplished legislation on data privacy and then trying to implement it? What advice would you offer the US as we begin moving in the deliberation in this space?
Well, I think that kind of advice is always unwelcome.
So stipulated.
Yeah, but I can tell something about what we have learned over these years. And I think if I was personally to redo it, I would maybe make it more robust rather than refined for ease of implementation. Make sure that you have strong independent authorities to make sure that enforcement actually happens in full. Be really strict on how people should be able to exercise their rights. I think it is so that if you're presented with half a page of information, you actually read it, and you can tick the box informed. If it's a full page, you don't even read the half page. If it's more than 10 pages, you read nothing. So, making sure that it's the same rules for everyone, because we also see that it's not implemented the same way all over Europe. Making sure that it's enforceable, because it's clear, not too detailed. And making sure that people can exercise their rights because they actually can engage with choice when they're presented to it. And I'm really happy for you, because I've always thought that it was really sort of off-brand, that the United States were not the first to have, strong privacy legislation for online activities. Because you're so much about the individual. The American dream is about the individual succeeding. The right to carry a gun, which I don't understand, it's about the individual. So many things here is about the individual, and yet there's no protection of privacy online. It's like everybody just accepting that, of course you can read my letters. Which, thinking about it, is completely crazy.
Well, thank you for that lessons. We won't call it advice.
No, but it's just, listen, look at yourself. You're all about individuals. Protect them.
Well, I mean, the complexity, of course, with data privacy is that it's also always about communities. So it makes it, I think, a complicated thing to understand for individuals as being only about themselves, when it's also about families and people you trade with and people that you communicate with. So, it's complicated. Maybe that's why it's off
Tell me
brand,
about it.
to say the least. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, I'll invite people to pose their questions, and we'll be passing microphones. I wanted to ask you about what I took from your remarks for the very first time, and I hadn't thought about this quite before, the kind of tension of competition that you face as a commissioner, the sort of chief commissioner of competition, which is both geopolitical and also market-based, and sort of how those things sometimes are quite different, but increasingly, and this was your last point about Oppenheimer's lesson, are sort of converging together. And so I wanted to ask you about how you think, if you see that as a tension and competition of those two ways of thinking about competition in your role, and if that's changed over time, over the decade or more that you've been working on competition in the EU.
We have a social market economy, I think to some degree as the US, which means that we have laws that say you cannot compete while destroying the environment. You cannot compete while destroying workers. You cannot compete while having child labor. You know, we have sort of organized the marketplace with all the things that we do not accept. And within that framework, we say, you go compete. And now it's become clearer and clearer because of changing geopolitics that we need a new sort of, you know, don't exploit us when we compete in order for the global marketplace to be trustworthy. So I see it as just as a next step as to what we have done already, because we don't want you to compete to destroy our economic security, just as well as we don't want you to compete to destroy our environment. And I would wish that it was different. Europe is the most trading continent on the planet. So, of course, this is absolutely crucial for us. But we want fairness in the marketplace. We want to restore fairness where it is being challenged. And we need to build in trust in our economic relations in a different way than what we've seen before. Because a semiconductor is not just a semiconductor. There are a lot of things in that, but there's also values built in that semiconductor. And I think it's important to realize that. It's not neutral.
Yep. Technology never is.
No.
It never is. Okay, questions from the audience.
As a European citizen, I was very encouraged to hear your commitment to take power back for the many from the few. However, I have some misgivings about the very hawkish China rhetoric that I heard from you. And you said that there is a playbook that China has that is quite unfair, and this obstructs markets and obstructs functioning. And I have two questions related to that. The first one is, why isn't the US an unfair competitor given the US IRA tax credits that go up to 75% of capital investment? And the second one is, since we are in a very different geopolitical moment than we were in 10 years ago, are you confident that what we're seeing in Europe is not the limits of the European model? I'm thinking about the Net Zero Industrial Act last year that was very ambitious in terms of providing the same kind of industrial policy that the US or China has, but failed for reasons that you are, I'm sure, quite well aware of, including the European Sovereignty Fund. So are your investigations enough, or are your sanctions on unfair subsidies enough for Europe? Thank you.
Well, buckle up. This is another hour and a half. Now, just a very short, just the headlines of it. First and foremost, when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the things that we have spent time on is to make sure that there is a sense of reciprocity, that European businesses can also have the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act when doing business in the US. And a lot of European businesses have woken up to say, yes, me too. And that is one of the things that we do not see with China. We definitely do not see the same thing. The second thing is, in general, with the Inflation Reduction Act, that I'm so happy that this enormous step for the US to join the fight of climate change has happened. And of course, there has been a number of irritants, but that should not overshadow the fact that this is really, really important legislation for green tech not only to develop, but also to be deployed in the US. Because looking at the numbers, China is in the lead, Europe is number 2, the US is number 3, and of course everybody needs to come on board. Second, looking at what I called the China playbook, we see that is happening. We also see the lack of reciprocity. We see that you're welcome at a certain time, then maybe not so much anymore. And then when you go back to do business in Europe where you came from, what follows you are very cheap products that are produced with what seems to be a production capacity that is heavily subsidized, which makes it impossible to compete against it. And these are two very, very different situations. And when we're thinking about our competitiveness, we think about our two transitions, the green and the digital ones. as the one that will create the prosperity that will enable us to fulfill our third strategic ambition, which is socially inclusive societies. So we really see the green and the digital transition as providing prosperity. But we cannot drive that with subsidies. You know, Europe can never outspend the US nor China. Also, we leave it to the Chinese to be Chinese. We would be very poor Chinese. So trying to, you know, have trust in the European model that has made Europe a very, very nice place to live. And especially if you're a woman, you know, looking at world history. So using the same model and having trust of the fact that competitiveness is something that is horizontal. You need skills, you need talent, you need research and innovation systems, you need access to that, you need uncorrupt authorities, you need a safe place to live, you need tax systems that are commendable in general. And that is our bets, rather than having taxpayers to subsidize something for a certain period of time. That can only be a helping element and a catalyst, but without all the other things being in place as well, we will not succeed.
Thank you. So we'll take another question. But I would just, I might add, I mean, I do remember the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, because I was working in Washington at the time, and the EU was not happy. I mean, I think that we've sort of, as a response to your point, I mean, it was not, you know, there was a sense of being swiped, and, you know, not fully, I think, consulted. So I think that has smoothed out a little bit, but it's quite competitive, I would say, in response to Daniela's question. Kriti.
When you talk about governance, it implies jurisdiction. And so if you go beyond what is it, how would you kind of expand this jurisdiction beyond Euro-America when the world is no longer what it used to be in the 1950s movement of Universal Declaration of Human Rights to a Universal Declaration of Digital Rights, or AI, your systemic rivalry and clearly a very hostile disposition from Euro-America towards the rest of the world, and where the largest number of users are going to be and producers are going to be of digitality and AI.
Well, that is some of the things that we think a lot about, because obviously we only legislate for Europe. We're not sort of trying to de facto legislate for the rest of the world. That wouldn't be proper. So we legislate for Europe. Of course, we hope to inspire, because as said, we cannot get this right from a European point of view alone. We need the world to come on board. And we have very good partners in the G7, but also that is not the world. What I see is that there are different ways. For instance, India has a very successful GovTech stack, have privacy laws. They do not do things the same way we do, definitely not, but they're also taking steps. Same with Brazil, also doing privacy laws, different, but also taking steps. And I think the important thing here is to say that, no, it may not be as it was. We should not think that we have, if we ever had, any moral authorities to say this is the way things should be. And for us, trying to figure out how not to travel with a pointed finger first, but to travel to forge partnerships, I think is one of the things that may inspire for the future, so that we can have a global approach to this. Because if you think you can tell people things, it's almost as bad as yelling at them. You know, most people, they like inspiration, but they also like the respect that they have their own responsibility. And of course, we focus a lot on the many countries where things are not as they were supposed to be, but maybe we should focus more on the many, many countries who have ambitions and who are democracies, just different as to who we are, and who also wants to protect their citizens against the negative side of technology, to figure out how to use the other side in the best possible way. And I think we can do that, but I think to some degree It demands a reflection on our side as to how to partner instead of trying to recruit. Because those are two completely different ways of being together. And I prefer the partnering.
Other questions?
Yeah, so thank you very much. That was really an inspiring talk. Now, you know, despite its detractors, the EU is not a giant federal state. It has limited powers. And the EU's been really creative in leading from its strong suit, which is its ability to engage in market regulation. But now, for the first time in a decade and a half, there's serious talk about treaty change. And so I'm wondering if you've given thought to how the treaty should be improved to give the EU better power to manage this digital space. Are there things that you think the treaty should include in this next round that would make your job easier?
Well, it scares me a bit that you say that now there may be treaty change. Because I have never met a citizens who thought that the discussion of interinstitutional relationships was what should keep you up at night, or the day for that matter. So I have always been sort of, let's see how far we can go with what we have. And I think that is a responsibility as a politician, as an enforcer as well, to use what we have instead of coming and asking for more before you can say exactly, I need precisely this and precisely that and precisely that third thing. And I'm not certain that enlargement in Europe, that treaty change is needed for that. I think enlargement is very important. Once Ukraine is out of the war, having won it, becoming a member, that will add immense dynamic to Europe. It will also sort of shift the balance, and it will be even more important also internally that we think about partnering up. So the culture is a truly integrating one. Since it is so difficult to get a treaty change, you know, I have never thought about that as a way out of the troubles that we have in actually changing reality. Because it's difficult enough what we do to enact new legislation and to enforce it and to see change happening within a foreseeable time frame. So I cannot answer your question.
Last one, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you for the privilege of asking this question, and certainly for your leadership work, both of you, as well as this conversation today, too. And I really appreciate your talking about the different phases of this work, too, as you work from legislation guidelines to enforcement to the community engagement. So I guess I wanted to lean in a little bit more to the community engagement at this time. Are there promising or priority strategies that you see right now that we should be thinking about or doing? In other words, are there things that you would prioritize in terms of engaging communities now, or are there promising models that we should be thinking about?
I don't think it can be done without it. So, to give you one example, by September we designated gatekeepers under the Digital Markets Act, and in the 6 months that follows, we, really kept an open door, an open house to speak with everyone interested. Of course, the gatekeepers had to comply with market participants, with researchers, academics, NGOs who had a view as to how should we make this happen. And we will really rely on this also for the future, because it cannot be done from, the address of the enforcer in Brussels. If we really want to change how the marketplace works, how social media works, then we should do our job. I would never privatize it to the individual citizens or to communities. But we also need, as citizens and as communities, to say that, oh, we're part of this. We can also do something. For instance, I would hope that what we have now in Europe to protect minors is something that people will ask all over the world. Because it cannot be that we let minors be exposed to what they are exposed to online as of today. And I think here communities plays an enormous role, not only in asking for better protection, but also using whatever we have today. And that is not only for the social media that we suspect to be really damaging for you, also for just the real time that is consumed with technology these days, because that time you will never get back. You cannot talk with friends. You cannot do what your mother says. You cannot play football or train the violin while you're online doing social media. So I also think here, we should just never give up on reality, on the physical world. And I think that is maybe one of the most fundamental things here. With the first wave of digitization, we gave up a lot of contact points. You don't have to go to the bank for money. You don't have, or to do your banking. You don't have to go to the municipality for your parking permit. You don't have to go to the police to pay your parking fines, all of that. You do everything online, you're traveling. With artificial intelligence, the risk is that we also lose relationships. Not just the contacts, but the relationships. ChatGPT, you can pay them not to have the AI friend, but the AI friend is so easy. It will not bully you, will not ask you awkward questions. Much easier. But it's not the human, troubled, annoying, fantastic, loving relationship that you have with another human. And also here, I think every community is part of making sure that we do not lose our relations. Because if we lose relationships, then we lose society.
Well, I think those of us who work in science and technology policy, part of our job or, part of what we're thinking through is writing hype cycles, which are often quite exhausting. I think to this last question, what was been interesting and encouraging about this hype cycle with regards to ChatGPT and the release of large language models to the public is that the public is now in the conversation in ways that they weren't. So, many people have been working on AI policy, present company very much included, for several years, but not in a way, I think, where the public felt engaged and invited to participate in the conversation. And I think that's really important and powerful and very much to be leveraged in this moment. So thank you for the honor of your lecture, for being our 2024 IAS Public Policy Lecture. Thank you for your extraordinary trajectory of work that has really put rights and values at the forefront of how we think about technology policy. It's been a true honor and a privilege. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Very honored.